Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm excited to introduce to you Adrian Reyes, who is a global client executive in the Connected Enterprise Group, which basically means he deals with billions of dollars and he's swimming in dough, right? I think that's what that means.
Lots of carbs. Lots of carbs.
Lots of cars. Yeah, I'm super excited to connect with you. I recently interviewed Mimi Kleben, who's one of our enterprise account executives in the learning side, and she's like, dude, you definitely have to interview Adrian. I think that would be a great interview. So now we're here.
Good to good to be here. Thanks for having me, man. And Mimi's awesome.
Yeah, she is awesome. Um, so I think a lot of us hear about the Connected Enterprise Group, and people think it's this really glamorous job, right, where you get to essentially work with the best of the best. Would love to hear, how you landed. Obviously it's extremely competitive, and it's a lot of salespeople. I think, at least at LinkedIn, that's one of their goals to work with like Fortune level clients and working with multi-million dollar contracts every day. Would love to hear about your story about how you ended up in the CEG.
Yeah, love it, love it. So for those listening, so CEG is an acronym uh, that we use at LinkedIn for our Connected Enterprise Group, as Davidson just made mention of. So it currently is a team covering our top 30 accounts um, at LinkedIn. And the way in which I got the role was by way of word of mouth internally. So I was in our global accounts team previously and had sat near or in the same section as our Connected Enterprise group, and was fortunate enough to be kind of referred in, so to speak. And had did some research. I didn't know too much at the time, other than what we might know from an external standpoint of Connected Enterprise Group. Connected with more people globally, and the more I kind of learned about what we're doing, how it's across all lines of business, felt like the time was right to make a swerve, and there hasn't been any looking back. So I've been doing it or been part of the team for almost a year and a half formally, and it's been a great ride. I've learned a ton.
Yeah, I think, obviously a lot of people who are in sales or account management, I think their goal is to get into large enterprise accounts, right? But
Yeah.
obviously it's not for everyone. I do hear that it's a lot of work, right? It's certainly not a job that, I hear you work more than a 40-hour week, essentially. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think I've always operated under. I always operated with. Yeah, I've always worked more than the 40 hours. It's I think over time and as you mature in your sales career, you start to find efficiencies and better ways to uh, find harmony and balance. With the Connected Enterprise role, or the role that I have, because you're dealing at a global level and you have counterparts and cross-functional partners within each line of business, there's definitely more time dedicated towards project management, program management, and coordination. And so, I think if anything, that's a muscle that I've been flexing more so than in my previous roles, just because of how much more complex the clients are and how much more support is dedicated to the accounts globally and across all lines of business. So I'd probably say like one of the major differences between or from my last role to this one is just the overall size, scope, and complexity of the clients, and then of course, how it impacts um, our the way in which we work. And so at a high level, like I went from like, let's call it 14, 20 accounts to 3, which at first kind of listen, some might be like, oh wow, that's it. But it's not. It's 3, but across all of our lines of business, um, and our clients are invested.
Yeah, and I hear that when you're working with enterprises that way, I feel like half the battle is just quarterback being a quarterback and just getting all the extra internal resources right. I hear that's even, and being really skilled in being able to get buy-in internally. I feel like that's more than half the battle, right?
Yeah, yeah. Internally and externally, absolutely. I will say, like, to validate that, it's not sexy, but um, you talked about skills with that. To be really organized, to be really clear with your messaging internally, externally is so key. And the reason being is because your buying committee, whether it be something with regards to internal processes or approvals, and externally, your buying committees are so much larger.
Mm.
So where if you're an SBS or SMB and you're dealing with the IT manager or a head of HR or something like that, they might handle multiple things all to themselves and have direct access to the CFO. Much more complicated here, because these companies are 100,000 employees strong.
So what are some skills that you would recommend for, let's say, someone is a mid-market rep or even a small medium business rep, and they want to eventually get into a CEG role, similar role as you? Like, what are some skills that you would recommend that maybe they're not thinking about, right? As someone who deals with more transactional sales and not dealing with like multi-million-dollar contracts every day.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's so many. If I was to boil it down, well, I think like rudimentary to any type of role, there's certainly an element of grit. And what I mean by that is specifically, the passion and perseverance to, kind of stick with it, to be resilient given setbacks, to be really clear as to your purpose and what your goals are. I mean, there's so much that's behind that. I'd say, to give a sample or to start to expose yourself to, more of a larger enterprise, I would really invest in, and or really invest and reflect on deals that were a little bit more complex. And by complex, let's say, for example, if you're mid market, maybe there was like 5 or more people in
Mm.
your buyer's circle. Um, Certainly, I think CEB quotes like 9 in your buyer circle. I would really kind of hone in on that, capitalize on that, invest in it, reflect after, because that experience is what could catapult you, um, internally and externally. Certainly, if you're getting a lot of, um, people on the client side who see you as trustworthy and credible, if you could do that on a repeated basis and iterate, really the sky's the limit. And a way to kind of build that muscle, so to speak. I've always been big on challenger sale,
Mm.
and so there's 3 kind of main pillars to that. I won't go into the full thing, but there's teaching your concept, teaching your overall viewpoint and perspective. Then there's tailoring it to your client, and then there's taking control. And um, it's not you taking control. It's really providing guidance to the right people or the right persons, within your account. So I'd really recommend personally, an investment in that, whether you subscribe to that or not, but some facet of, complex selling at its true form.
Yeah, and so I know when we spoke earlier, you say that your Atomic Habits is a book that has helped you in a lot of the ways you've been successful. Would you elaborate a little bit about that and how that's helped you stay organized and clear on everything?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So, and for those of you, I know it's been circulating, um, particular teams within LinkedIn, I think specifically within sales solutions. And I have to give, actually, I can't take credit for it. Andre Brathwaite and Stefan were two who really encouraged me to kind of pick it up. Um, the whole gist of it is that there's compound improvements, specifically bite-sized or atomic compound improvements, albeit like 1% every day, so long as you establish the right habits. And there's, I will say it's been a game changer for me in not just the way in which I stay organized, but my overall discipline, my overall system, because it allows for me to think, to use my mind share in the areas that I really do need to um, dedicate energy towards. So it's something as simple as just let's make it really simple. So I do a lot of habit stacking. So here's a simple example. We're in a pandemic. So if I go for a jog, I will come inside and start cleaning, right? And so every time I go for a jog, I'm going to tidy something up. Um, every time I'm engaging with a client, I'm going to or send a follow up email within 24 hours and book that in my calendar. Every morning. So I'm trying to read a lot now. Every morning I read one chapter of every book or of the book I'm reading. And so and Davidson, you and I, we are in like a morning meditation session that Jackie leads, right? So that's kind of built in. And that type of system is making things not just repeatable, but also predictable. And you notice improvements. I meditate better, I read faster, I'm able to consume more information, I'm able to use my brain power on things that are truly deserving of it, and not what am I going to wear the next day, not when am I going to clean, that type of thing.
That reminds me of how Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs, like they always wear the same thing because they're like, hey, I would rather use that energy on something more productive than trying to figure out what I'm gonna wear the next day, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. They're a bit extreme. I won't go that far, but I do try my best to pick out the outfit. Or like, for example, pre-pandemic, like going to the gym in the morning, having your gym clothes like ready to go. Some people sleep in them. I don't do that, but like having them all ready to go. So as soon as you wake up, it's right in front of you, and that act of putting your gym clothes on is exactly kind of what I'm referring to.
Yeah, and it seems like so you're very thoughtful and intentional about where you put your energy. So what are some things that you had to cut out of your life that, maybe are new practices that, you used to think serves you, but now you're like, maybe that isn't the best use of my time.
Yeah. I think this has been coming up quite a bit. Uh, there has been a lot of intention that I've had around saying no,
Mm,
and no specifically to, for example, internal meetings where I'm not necessarily needed.
right.
Um, that's helped to, in place of that, I've built in focus time to help, kind of give pit stops throughout the day so that, yeah, I'm going to have some days where I'm going 7:30 in the morning to like 7 at night, but that's not sustainable, and also my energy level between calls isn't the best. So,
Mm,
really picking my spots and being strategic around the meetings that I'm participating in, being very action oriented, cutting meetings down to like 30 minutes
mm.
versus an hour, documenting the crap out of those meetings, and or having someone on the team be accountable for that. And then also, well, I'm trying to think of like pre-pandemic life. Things are a little bit different now,
Yeah.
um, because the whole aspect of travel has changed. So yeah, I'll stick. I think the use of my time has been effective. Working on weekends, I've kind of cut that out a little bit. You
Hmm.
know, that way I'm much more focused, and I make sure Friday, hey, I got to get these things done. So that way on Saturday, Sunday, I'm really using that time to recharge and re-energize for the coming week.
I'm curious as to because I think a lot of people think they want to get into CEG or like GAM or global accounts and things like that.
Hmm.
But what's something that maybe we don't realize, but then now that you're in it, you're like, oh, okay, I wish I knew this before I like kind of went straight into it.
Yeah, yeah. One of the biggest differences is I would say the program management piece, the project management piece. I think if you're coming into a role like this, and I mean, we all have bad habits. I have bad habits, but if there are some elements where you're not used to um, documenting and keeping strong kind of organization skills, spreadsheets, you name it, um, that other people can leverage, notes. That's one. There's also a leadership component, and so if you have a pod or a team that is um, 20 plus people deep, you got to make sure that as a group everyone is kind of singing the same song, and or you are making sure that you're really clear with your messaging, and how you can kind of go about a particular pursuit or motion, and you need to be really mindful of everyone's time. So a lot of the internal folks are your customers, and so if you're not used to leading and collaborating, those will be a steeper curve, because your coworkers are going to expect a lot out of you, and if these are relatively new muscles, then those would be the biggest areas of investment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps a lot. So I keep hearing program management, project management. I hear that honestly, like half the job is that, right? And that is quite different from, like a SMB rep. So and then I keep hearing that clear and concise communication is important. So how does one practice how to become a better communicator? Because I feel like that's I mean, that it's easier said than done, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's some practical things. One is what I mentioned earlier around shortening meetings. If you take your meeting from 30 minutes, sorry, from an hour to 30, or from 30 to 15, that forces you to communicate clearly. So it could be something as simple as like fronting your ask.
Hmm.
So that's like something verbally that could be practiced by way of emails. And if you're emailing a client or a coworker, having that ask in the subject line or the first sentence, and then the rest of your crap you can include thereafter. I have a lot of mentors, so they certainly have helped to help me to develop that practice. And then obviously, the more experience you have, the more mature you are in your with your client engagements. The more executives you're dealing with, the more business acumen you establish or develop. Certainly you start to see and become a creature of habit and or of your environment, and so you'll notice, some of your clients aren't communicating with as many words as your more junior clients were. They're not as verbose, and so you certainly have to not just mirror that, but also see how you can gain some effectiveness in terms of how you communicate by doing so.
Hmm. That's a good call out. And I mean, other than experience, because it sounds like a lot of it is just like through repetition and through experience and practice.
Yeah.
Is there a way to almost like practice that like, let's say you're a relatively talented young professional, and it is important to communicate in less economy of words. I think that's what they say. How does one like practice that intentionally?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Here's one tip that I picked up a few years ago from an old manager. One was to practice listing. So in everything that you do, whether it be internally or with clients, is to list maybe top three things, and then also to speak in headlines. sounds really straightforward, but if, for example, you have a slide that you're presenting, really ask yourself what the so what is, and or sound it out with somebody. So the speaking in headlines, the so what, and the listing, like the top three things, that could take a 60-page deck down to 5, um, which is really challenging, especially if you're so emotionally connected to the deck. So that's that. And then also having, hate to weave in some atomic habits here, but having an accountability partner, someone that you trust and you feel safe with, kind of filter your thoughts. So especially given we're in a pandemic, being able to sound it out with someone that's not yourself helps to filter your thoughts, and they can play it back to you perhaps in a more concise, digestible way.
That's awesome. That's really helpful. Huh.
Great.
No, this is very helpful. So I know in the CEG, right, there's a lot of like how do you not burn out, I guess is my question, right? Because I do think with these higher pressure positions, there's a lot riding on it, right? It could be millions and millions of dollars, like if you mess up. But ultimately, I know we all mess up. But how do you
Mm.
get into a good mental framework where, like, when you do mess up, it doesn't like affect you the next day?
Mm. Yeah, there's definitely a ramp period where, and there's a LinkedIn course on this, I think it's called Disrupt Yourself. And so, having taken that as I was going through my first year journey, there's definitely demands on you, and you really have to kind of focus in. So, generally speaking, while I definitely hit a couple walls in my first year. One is, kind of learning through that process was allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Um, especially if you hold such a high bar for yourself, and or you've succeeded in your past life, previous roles, whatever. And so, part of that is having a beginner's mindset and being comfortable with not knowing everything. And there's going to be a little bit of fight or flight as you're learning any new role. Anybody that's starting a new role, new line of business, whatever. The other is certainly a gratitude practice, and so that allows for you to reframe. I do mine in the morning. I'm a morning person, so that allows for you to reframe perspective and just kind of think of a bigger picture as a practice. So there's 3 statements I repeat to myself. One is I will let go of, I am grateful for, and I will focus on. So those are 3 statements that either repeat to myself in the subway or I write it down. And so that certainly helps just from a day-to-day perspective. And lately I've been really big on being clear with your values. And so that's a little bit more nuanced. And maybe offline, Davidson, or maybe we do another session on that, but that allows for just bigger picture thinking, so that as you approach or experience short-term setbacks, you're immediately able to default to the bigger picture and say, oh, well, that call didn't go as well, and I'm not going to beat myself up over it. And you're allowing yourself to kind of fail, or fail forward in the face of progress, or upholding your values.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of reminds me of this exercise I learned called like getting elevation. So anytime there's something that happens, you zoom out like an airplane, like a 50,000 foot view, and then you look at it like, all right, in the grand scheme of things, like, is this really going to destroy my career, or am I making it bigger than it really is?
That's a hell of a visualization. Yeah, I could see that. That should be like an infographic or like a video or something you do. Something that mentors ask me is like, hey, that decision you're stressing out over, is it going to be like in 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Are you going to look back and be like, Davidson, what were you thinking with that podcast? You know what I mean? No, they're, so
Yeah.
no, that's great. That's a great example.
Yeah. I love it. So it seems like you have a lot of self-awareness, obviously, but then you also have a lot of like interpersonal awareness as well. right?
Yeah, I definitely get energy from people and connection, and so it's something that I've invested in. And I mean, a lot of people throw around the word authenticity, like that comes naturally to me.
Hmm.
But I think there's elements of um, being present and really being compassionate and actively listening that I have found to be much more enjoyable over time than just talking and or your stream of consciousness.
Hmm.
So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Like, I'll accept any compliments gladly. But no, it's definitely genuine.
Yeah, I think that's why people say you're similar to Garrett as well, because I think Garrett Ross is also very authentic, like very genuine. And I think it comes from a place of like he's like when he's listening to you and you're both similar in that way. Like you can generally tell that you're like present. You're not thinking about like the next meeting or the next thing. You're actually listening, not from judgment, but just understanding, right?
Mhm.
Same thing.
It takes it's a it definitely takes some stamina and wherewithal. I'm far from perfect. And by the way, Garrett's a better looking guy than me, so but I'll gladly get mixed up with Garrett anytime.
Yeah, I guess humility is also a practice as well, right? uh, no, this is helpful actually. Honestly, I didn't expect to get into a lot of like the routines and the habit stacking. I think is extremely powerful. What are some other interesting books that you read recently that you would recommend for people who are into self development?
Yeah. Wow. The two I'd probably say from a foundational perspective, the two I am constantly referring back to or recalling and or applying are grit and the happiness equation. Yeah, I'd start with those two. Um, I don't know in what order. It depends on the person. Choose your own adventure. But I'd start with those two. Those would be two where, out of, it's a good book if you can read it over a weekend or in a day. And I ate that stuff for breakfast. I can't go into detail about it. We'd need an episode 3. Um, but yeah, I'd start with those two.
And I'm curious, do you reread books? Like if you really enjoy Grit, for instance, like do you check back in every year or 6 months or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So, what actually helps with retention is application. So, if I can apply key frameworks or takeaways, that's number one. Number two is, and I probably need to have a better system for this, but I do take notes on books, just in like a Word document stored away. So, if ever I need to, or a OneNote, so if ever I need to refer back to it, I can Control F back to that particular quote or section, and then I list the page so that I can just refer back to it.
Hmm.
And it's actually great because it's to the point now where like other people are reading the book and like, hey, did you list out your skills? And I'm like, I can't remember doing that. That was 5 years ago. So it helps, with the virality of some of these books.
Huh. Yeah, it's cool. It seems like you actually apply a lot of the stuff that you learn, right? Because I think sometimes we're learning too much, but then we don't give ourselves the space to actually just practice it and actually be whatever it is. And I think sometimes we're inundated with too much, right? So it's like once we program ourselves and then we read all these other things and then we're kind of like we're always reprogramming ourselves. So it's interesting. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you really are in the right mindset when you're consuming the book, which for many people, even for myself, it can take a lot. You got to be in the right space
Hmm.
mentally and physically. So, um, if you have that mindset, you're almost excited to like play it back, to get on the phone, kind of share what you learned with someone, even though it might be abstract and or inaccurate,
Hmm.
but it helps to kind of play that out and or apply it. You get so excited. So I mean, I'm speaking for myself.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of these concepts you actually, when with your clients, sometimes you'll even teach them or you'll just discuss it, right? Just as a, because some are interested in the same thing a lot of times, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it depends on who you're referring to or who you're speaking with, but I think what it allows for just genuinely is for you to have a broader range. And if you're talking to a chief learning officer and they're big on the grow model, or they have established grit as a leadership practice and standard, you're off to the races. For if you're talking to a CRO and and or a sales enablement leader, and they're big on particular methodology, at least you have some sort of frameworks or a foundation to go off of, to the point where they might be like, hey, do you mind teaching some of that to my field? And same goes for marketing, same goes for TA, HR, lots of acronyms for your listeners. But yeah, absolutely. I think just genuinely, the more well-rounded you are, just the better professional you can be.
Actually, I have an interesting question
Yeah, go for it.
about this, but have you noticed a common theme amongst like your mobilizers, like people that really can get stuff done, like people that have that influence that can truly cause change on a macro scale within an org versus like, and maybe it's not even title, maybe they just are really good with change management.
Yeah, that's great. And um, I think I'm glad that you called up the term mobilizers. So in Challenger Seal, they talk about the 3 profiles out of the 7 that they categorize to be contacts on the client side that, you know, help to drive organize or have a higher propensity or probability of driving what they call organizational consensus,
Mm.
uh, and or assisting getting the deal across the line. And a common denominator, I mean, I go through a checklist, and I might butcher this, I need the slide in front of me, but I usually look for these telltale signs. One is like, do they ask thought-provoking questions? Do they prioritize we over me? So do they prioritize the company over their own interests? The other one is, are they able to do they share a perspective? Do they speak to realities and or things that are happening in the business? Which is key. And then the last is, are they action oriented? And you see that by way of their behavior.
Uh,
If you tell me you're action oriented, Davidson, like, it's like, sure, that's kind of weird for you to tell me that. But if you see that they have energy, or they have an orientation or a preference towards executing, that's the biggest clincher out of everything I just made mention of. So that kind of instinctual checklist I have, it's kind of built into my tacit knowledge now, to the point where, like, I meet people and I'm like, mobilizer,
uh,
subconsciously. Those are the common denominators where I'm like, okay, this is someone I want to invest in, because again, they're trying to solve for the greater good, versus siloing themselves and or withholding information, or what have you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and a follow-up question in regards to that. So what if you have a contacts, like your contact is not necessarily like a mobilizer, but someone that can give you access to the mobilizer? What's your communication to them so that they don't feel like they're being stepped over with, but included in the conversation as well, or empowered?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. This is like conscious business 101, but I think like clean escalation is always key. So bringing them along the journey. 1 + 1 = 3 in that case. And so, yeah, in an ideal scenario, that would be the case where I could bring Davidson with me to, speak to Mike Derizin or something like that. Not to say you're not a mobilizer, but I'm just using you as an
Right.
example.
So no, this is really helpful, Adrian. A lot of good tips, a lot of good. Yeah, I feel like this is helpful because I do think a lot of people are just curious as to what are the skills, what are some of the action areas where people could improve on, and whether it's gaining consensus, how to spot a mobilizer, how to lead, or how to write better business emails, how to be more concise. I feel like a lot of these tips is useful for anyone, right? Not even for people who aren't revenue generating. Whether it's being a project manager or a program manager or whatever it is, I feel like these are all very valuable skills for people to have.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're a nutritionist, if you are a customer success manager, if you're a yoga instructor, absolutely. These are common things that these are in some respects life skills. So no, I'm glad I was able to kind of share some nuggets, and I hope that it was of value to yourself and your listeners. Hopefully I'm back for another episode in season 2 or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be cool, man. That'd be cool. I feel like we have so much to talk about.
Yeah, maybe it'll be in person, who knows, but
Yeah.
we won't prognosticate.
Cool. Thanks, Adrian. Have a good day.
All right, you too.
Take care.